Good evening. 'Tis I, the Blue Baron, defender of traditionalism. Fides Traditio Monarchia!
And his faithful assistant, the bearded Canadian.
You're probably wondering why I'm dressed so much differently than usual.
Not to mention we're in a completely different location.
It is because this month we are celebrating Halloween. I know some people here may have, shall we say, a problem with Halloween, but I for one quite enjoy it. Much of what it consists of is harmless fun, and the darker aspects it does have usually provide many opportunities for true goodness to come of it. But before we get into that, I thought I would read an article by the Mad Monarchist, which relates highly to Halloween, and is very good food for thought for those of you with mixed feelings about it. Now, I know what you're thinking.
Wait, this isn't your article.
And you'd be right. I willingly admit this is not my original work. However, as you can see from this clip showing everything I've written in yellow, I am expanding upon the article significantly, as well as presenting it in a style that I think makes it much more deliverable to the masses. Also, since this is a highly innovative show, when I'm reading from the article from now on, I'll usually be holding up my book like this, so you can more easily tell when the words are coming from the article or from me. Also, number one, here's a warning for you. It is highly important in this episode that you don't speak unless asked to. Your role in this one may seem small, but your presence here is important because it allows for a visible audience to complement our invisible audience, one that mirrors their reactions to the subjects being discussed, and provides an authentic catalog of the natural expressions, exclamations, gestures, and perhaps even fear that someone who has not thought about these themes may experience upon truly reflecting on them for the first time. So now, without further ado, here is Confessions of a Creepy Christian by the Mad Monarchist.
This article was written by the Mad Monarchist. It was written from his perspective, and he refers to himself. These are his words, not mine, and I do not claim them as my own work. I am simply an authoritative mouthpiece where his words should be protected from. Certain instances where he refers to his own personal details and family have been omitted from this reading out of respect for him, and to avoid any additional confusion. Again, his words, not mine, though I do agree with them quite a bit.
Tea is much better than water for keeping the throat from getting sore. Halloween is, hands down, my favorite holiday, and has always been so. It is the one time of year where I am considered festive and in the holiday spirit rather than just being creepy. My immediate family always have celebrated Halloween, but going to a private religious school most of the time as a boy, I became aware that some Christians have a problem with it. Not everyone does, and no group seemed to be entirely consistent on the subject. At my school, when I was very small, Halloween was okay to an extent, then later it was banned as being completely evil. There were Protestants who were okay with it, some who opposed it, and I can remember one Catholic priest saying it was completely evil, only to be replaced by another priest who said it was good and only anti-Catholics thought it was evil. Take your pick. Like I said, no group is consistent on it. As the Mad Monarchist later stated in his article, his late mother always said, "It is what you make of it," and whether it was good or bad was entirely up to you. I tend to take that view of it as well, though there's also the original Christian view of Halloween.
Which is?
We'll get into that in a bit. What always bothered me, though, was the idea some Christian fundamentalist types have that Halloween is too dark to be compatible with Christianity. This bothers me because I want to be Christian, but the Christianity of sunshine, light, and happiness seem to exclude me. According to my parents, I've had my days and nights mixed up since the day I was born. The light hurts my eyes, and, well, happiness is just a word no one has ever associated with me. It also struck me as extremely bizarre given my understanding of Christianity. Here you have a religion that has as its symbol a method of execution, a religion based on God becoming man, being killed, having people poke their fingers in his gaping wounds, and who commands you to eat his flesh and drink his blood. All of this, and you think I'm too creepy? I wonder sometimes if people are reading the same Bible I have, because, as I have often said, Christianity is a Lovecraftian death match, not a hippie religion. Commenter Peter of Carolina also said the following on this theme. It is unfortunate that people think you are morbid and creepy, but perhaps a part of you likes it that way. The deeper things of the faith aren't so happy-clappy as the present culture seems to prefer. I think we have become so accustomed to images of the crucified Christ that we tend to forget how gruesome and shocking the actual event was. The mad monarchist then replied, "One factor may be that I'm from an area with Spanish roots, and if you've seen much Spanish religious art, you know it tends to be rather graphic. However, most people just ignore it. I've told people who said the image of Christ they prefer is the Lamb of God. That's nice, lambs are cute and soft and all that, but then I remind them what the symbolism meant. It doesn't mean God's little pet lamb who follows Mary to school. It means a sacrificial lamb, like the sacrificial lambs of the Old Testament that were slit open with a knife, bled out on the altar, and then eaten. And then they get a sick, horrified look on their face and run away. Maybe it is just me. Some of this I have touched on before, so I will not go through it all again, but it seems to me that authentic Christianity is, to put it mildly, not for the faint of heart. The Bible describes eternal, celestial beings of another plane of existence locked in a cosmic struggle for domination. Giant monsters, a witch summoning a ghost, dragons, people and animals being possessed by demons, people raised from the dead, and I could go on at length about the angels, as I have somewhat before on these pages. Some of them do or can look like us, sure, but the description of them in their own habitat is terrifying. Some have bestial bodies, 3 heads, lots of wings, others are constantly engulfed in flames, some are giant wheels covered with eyeballs, and so on. Real nightmare fuel. They kill children, slaughter armies by the thousands, and you will notice, even when appearing on a happy occasion, always start by telling the person they are appearing before to stop being afraid. They are not chubby flying babies, folks. If you ever see an angel that is not undercover, you will most likely drop to your knees in mind-melting terror. Anyone who thinks spooky or scary things are incompatible with Christianity should consider just how many scary things are directly featured in the Bible. Take Mark 5:9, for example. I recently discovered from a commentator on this very article that the demons mentioned in this chapter answered they were called legion, because at that time a legion was understood to be 5,000 men. So the meaning of that statement was the man in question was possessed by 5,000 demons. That's pretty terrifying when you actually stop to think about it. People who think the film The Exorcist is too dark to be Christian, since it features a child possessed by a demon, should remember their own Bible features a man possessed by 5,000 demons. Which do you think is more horrifying? I would think it would be the latter, but it seems that many would not agree with me on that. On the subject of demons, many fundamentalist-type Christians would say any literary work that talks about demons in great detail should be avoided. But what they forget, aside from the obvious fact that if they applied that logic consistently they'd have to avoid the Bible, is the actual origin of these types of books. This type of book, called a demonology, or study and classification of demons, would no doubt not be welcome in their homes. But what may surprise them to know is that most demonologies were in fact written by devout Christians with the purpose of understanding the biblical and mythological context of adversarial spirits. Theologians have written dissertations in Christian demonology, classical occultism, classical mythology, and Renaissance magic to clarify the connections between these spirits and their influence in various cultures. The study of demonology was historically used to understand morality, behavioral tendencies, and has even been used as symbolism to relay anecdotal tales and folklore. Much like what I do. Take, for example, one of the most famous demonologies, the demonology of King James. King James VI of Scotland and I of England wrote a dissertation titled Demonology. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's spelled with an A before the N-I-E at the end. Anyway, it was first sold in 1597. Several years prior to his first publication of the King James Authorized Version of the Bible. Off looks, one would assume from this publication that King James practiced or dabbled in dark arts that would undermine Christian doctrine. But if one were to actually read the book and understand it, they'd discover this book depicts the exact opposite. Within 3 short sections, King James wrote a philosophical dissertation in the form of a Socratic dialogue for the purpose of making arguments and comparisons between magic, sorcery, and witchcraft, but wrote also his classification of demons. In short, the demonology of King James was written by a Christian, for Christians, with a Christian purpose. Yet many do not understand this. The following is taken from the Mad Monarchist rant, God Ain't Fuzzy. It seems to me that the Western, formerly Christian world, particularly, has an increasingly warped view of religion. That includes many Christians themselves, in my view, and not simply the secularist opposition. In fact, when I watch some religiously themed or spiritual-type horror movies, I sometimes think that the secularist crowd understands at least some aspects of religion better than most religious people do. It comes down to this. Most today view religion, church, God, etc., as something all warm and fuzzy. You're supposed to be inclusive and tolerant, love everyone and everything, and if someone does something wrong, you better fall over yourself to assure them that while their actions may present an occasion for possibly doing something incorrect or being morally disordered, I love that one, that doesn't change the fact that you love the guilty party, oodles and oodles. Warm and fuzzy, cute and cuddly Christians.
Cute and cuddly, boys. Cute and cuddly.
Well, I'm sorry, but I cannot go there. God ain't fuzzy. Jesus is not supposed to be your BFF in the clouds. Religion is not a fun hobby for those inclined, and the church wasn't created to encourage social justice and champion democracy. In fact, as I've said before, democracy is in its nature anti-Christian, but that's not the topic here. Religion is not about some idea of a parallel or alternate reality. It is about the ultimate reality. And when you're talking about God, you're talking about an entity, for lack of a better word, that is more great, more powerful, and yes, even more terrifying than our puny little half-brains could ever comprehend. In older forms of language, words like terrible and dreadful were often used. Religion is about the ultimate conflict between good and evil. The evil part we don't seem to have too much of a problem comprehending. Our blackest nightmares have concocted some images so frightening that we could imagine they come fairly close. The good, frankly, we cannot comprehend at all. So much suffering pervades the human condition that our concept of goodness is rather limited, and even our wildest dreams of paradise fail to measure up. Ask a human to describe hell, and you get Dante's Inferno with lots and lots of excruciating detail, each horror more spine-tingling than the last. Even those who've never read Dante are still familiar with it from its permeation of popular culture, and even those who aren't aware of that can describe a night on Bald Mountain to the same effect. Now, ask a human to describe heaven, and you get something like the Elysian Fields or a cloud in a harp. Notice the difference? God is the greatest good, and we cannot fathom what that means. Even today, the term itself, greater good, almost invariably carries negative connotations. If you think God is fuzzy, read about the prophet Elijah in the Bible, who, on divine orders, killed 500 prophets of the god Baal. Consider that one of the sins of King Saul was that he showed mercy to the Amalekites when God had ordered him to kill everyone and everything. As it was, King Saul spared only the Amalekite king and his best livestock, and even that was too lenient for God. Some might try to soften this blow by pointing out the strong evidence that the Amalekites, along with many of the other tribes God commanded the slaughter of, were in fact Nephilim, the children of the Watchers, fallen angels, and the daughters of man, human women, and therefore argue that they needed to be wiped out. Now, I personally do believe that many such tribes were made up of Nephilim, but I don't really think that takes away from the lack of fuzziness displayed here. Plus, it also adds even more to the point here that Christianity is inherently full of horrors. I mean, think about it. The Watchers, who were fallen angels, aka demons, reproduced with human women, creating a people that were quite literally demon spawn. As a matter of fact, it makes you ponder something which is just as unsettling. Would the child who is only half human still have the capacity for salvation? I do not know the answer, but pondering that and other questions raised by this only further drives home our point here about how genuinely creepy authentic Christianity can be. There are numerous other examples of God smiting people, devastating nations, and showing no mercy, taking no prisoners, and all of that stuff that atheists these days love to point out and Christians try to gloss over by uncomfortably saying that the Old Testament stuff doesn't really count or something of the sort. All of that changed with the New Testament and Jesus, right? Not so fast. The apocalypse is in the New Testament, and the enumerated horrors there that come with the return of Christ makes even the harshest punishments of the Old Testament pale in comparison. The point I am trying to get at is that God is so far above us that we cannot judge these sorts of things. I think of 1 Corinthians 6:12. All things are lawful to me, but all things are not expedient. All things are lawful to me, but I will not be brought under the power of any. Not a good context, perhaps, but that is the phrase that leaps to mind. We are not to say that what God does or wills is good or bad. We define good as anything that God does or wills. It comes from God. God is not subject to any judgment.